This is an interesting time to hire and to be hired. So today we're going to dive into this area of talent acquisition and really putting your best foot forward. Dive into this with Mike Acker and Michael Yinger.
Welcome to Advance with Mike Acker, the podcast designed to help entrepreneurs, business leaders, and professionals alike break through barriers by improving their practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Your host is a best-selling author, executive coach, and founder of the Advance Public Speaking School and Advantage Publishing Group, two companies dedicated to providing an edge for leaders. Find out more about Mike at mikeacker.com. Now here's your host, Mike Acker.
Michael, thank you so much for being on the program with me today. Welcome.
Mike, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So the whole goal here is to help people advance in their career, advance in their understanding, advance. And I think you have a great insight into an area that a lot of people want to know more about. Where is the whole area of talent acquisition going in the next several years, and how does it affect them?
Yeah, a lot of changes, primarily driven, as we might imagine, coming out of COVID. Companies are having to be more focused on what the individuals want, and they're taking that into account. So this is still really you might say, a buyer's market, or it's certainly a job seeker's market. And this is likely going to continue for quite some time, according to all the stats that I see. There's still large numbers of people quitting. There still is a huge gap between the jobs that are out there and the number of people that are available to fill those jobs. And so talent acquisition is going to have to be really focused on being presenting to the people what it is that they want to get from the company, being very focused around that. Now, technology is helping because it's taking improving some of the productivity aspects of it, and it's still going to come down to that people relationship that talent acquisition is going to have to face, because more and more there's the recognition that this whole conversation around bringing somebody into an organization is really a sales conversation. You're, as a person in talent acquisition, what are you doing to convince that person that this is something that they want to buy? They want to buy this job. They want to come and work for you. And so that whole human relationship, creating rapport, connecting with people, very important, and will be for the next several years.
You know what you made me think of is just recently someone came knocking on our door and said, hey, would you be up to selling your house?
Yeah. Yeah.
A real estate acquisition, right? Now,
yeah.
We are not interested. And so my wife and I were thinking about it. And then we thought to ourselves, well, if we were interested, this is the value that we would place on our house, regardless of whether it's the current market value. This is the value that we would put on it. And there is an essence that right now people need to know their value.
Yeah.
And that way they're ready for those conversations. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good analogy. And by the way, I got one of those letters yesterday, so I know exactly what you're talking about. It just tells you where real estate is, although we're not going to go into real estate. You have to know what you want, and quite frankly, as a job seeker, you need to know that the company that you're talking to is the one that's going to provide those things to you, because the person who's the recruiter they're going to pitch you on whatever it is that they have to offer. You got to be prepared to say, well, okay, that's fine, except that I want a company that has a vision, or I want to know that I'm going to make a difference in my community, or whatever it is, or I want to work from home. You got to have a good understanding of what your needs and wants are, because you will have choices. Mm-hmm. One, you'll have choices within the offer that's being presented to you potentially, but also there are different companies that you could go to work for that might provide those things that are more important. There was a recent survey that came out and said, actually, salary is no longer near the top, that people are looking more for belonging aspects, they're looking for social consciousness. So those kinds of things have crept into the conversation. But as a job seeker, you have to be prepared with what it is that you want and what it is that you will accept when it comes time for to consider an offer.
I think it's so interesting because one of the things I do as a communication coach when I'm working with people is I help people get interviews and prepare for interviews at a very high level.
Mm.
And one person came in and he was actually just focused on the money aspect, and his personality and his mannerisms, this is a while back now, matched that kind of modality, if you know what I mean. In other words, he was very hard skill oriented versus soft skill oriented.
Sure.
I'm changing some of the specifics here, but it's very interesting. You're talking about not only the talent acquisition needs to come in here with people skills and not just the hard facts, but really it's give and take. It's both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that the reality is that if you wanted to flip burgers or, you know, shovel chicken, you could get a job tomorrow anywhere. The good jobs, the kind of jobs that people say they want, you still have to work at it. I talked to a CEO not long ago who was advertising for chief operating officer. He got 1,000 applicants. Whoa. So you got to know, one, that you're capable of doing the job, and what is it that you expect from that company when the time comes to be in the conversation. It's you hit it right on the head. It's a balancing act. It's a two-way street. The company's got to have the right sort of opportunities, and you got to know what it is you want and be prepared to talk about that.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, Michael, as we dive into this topic some more, tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're a good person to talk about this aspect of talent acquisition and growth and some other areas we'll get into.
I've been in talent acquisition now for about 20 years. Worked for a number of companies, primarily in the outsourced recruiting space. I've done just about every job that you can do. I've been in sales, I've been in client delivery, I've been in product management, sourcing, the whole gamut. And recently, I took on being a co-founder for an HR tech startup. We have a product that evaluates and ranks resumes, making it easier for the recruiter, taking some time out of the process, etc. So all those things really has me see the industry as a whole, where the industry is going, but also see it from both sides. You know, what's the job seeker side, but also what's the company side who's looking for that. Whether you're insourcing your, whether you do all your talent acquisition internally, or whether you've outsourced it to some company. There are some common things that you need to look at, I think, to be successful in terms of talent acquisition as a process.
I think one of the ones that really is important is the whole aspect of hiring bias.
Sure.
And I mean, we're all aware of what's going on with the Friends TV show, right? And the one of the writers is like, oh my gosh, I didn't hire very diverse group, and she was biased towards a certain group just because of the 1990s and where she was at in that point in time. But now she's like, I would do things different. So everybody's being aware of this and wanting to make sure that they don't have a hiring bias towards anything. So talk to us about, how does hiring bias affect us and the long-term effects of hiring bias in organizations?
I look at hiring bias in two ways. There's explicit bias, where you're only hiring people because they look and sound a certain way, and that's the way you're doing things. Then there's the unconscious bias, where you look around and realize that everybody looks like you, and you didn't intend it that way, but that's the way it turned out. So there's, you know, the unconscious aspect to it. A lot of the statistics that are out there now look at, when you talk about the long-term impact of bias in the hiring process, they don't look so much at the companies that exhibit bias. What they do is they look at the companies that have exhibited this tendency towards inclusion and diversity, DE&I. And what they found is that if you've got a diverse workforce, one, your employees are more engaged, because employees prefer to work in an environment that is more like their society or their geography, that they're just more comfortable. Two, they're more productive at a 2 and 3 times clip. There's better cash flow, and there's better profitability. So that's what companies get when they choose to be diverse and they work towards mirroring society, mirroring their customers, and so forth. Companies, so you could look at it the opposite direction. Companies that don't practice like that, they tend to get a reputation, and so that reputation impacts not only their customers but also the people who apply for jobs, so they don't do as well. So there's clearly documented evidence that shows engaging in a diverse process, in looking for a mix of employees that have the skills and also mirror your society that you're working in, is a positive thing in terms of organizational performance. That's, those aren't my stats. Those are the stats that are out there. They're readily available. And then just a question of, what do you want to do about it? And you can, technology can help a little bit, except that you got to be careful with the technology, because who built the technology, and how's the technology thinking about what it, the input that it gets, right? Because the AI systems, we'll just talk about artificial intelligence for a minute, they get their results, or they learn based on what they're told, what the feedback is. And so you can program unconsciously AI to be picking things that you didn't want to do. So you got to balance that. And even if the AI is finely tuned and it is finding the appropriate resources and they're coming in, there's still probably a person interviewing them. And that's often where the breakdown is. And so a company has to look not just at technology, but also at their internal processes to ensure that they're not perpetuating unconscious bias by the nature of who's doing the conversation with the candidates and who's making the hiring decision.
It's nowadays, it's the recognized bias can be borderline racism. Like, yeah, I'm just bringing people in who are fitting this, or sexism,
right,
or whatever ism, right? So it could have just an ism attached to it, but it's that unconscious. I'm sure that when they were looking for the 6 actors for Friends, they weren't thinking, we just need this type of group right here.
Yeah.
But it was an unconscious bias towards the industry at that point in time. So how do we fight that? How do we overcome that? And I think that's easy for us as parents with our kids. It's easy for us as employers. It's easiest for us employees. There's unconscious biases. I grew up in Mexico, so I love speaking Spanish. I'm always drawn to people who speak Spanish. There's a bias inside of me that I want to speak Spanish. And if I'm hiring 2 different people, one happens to be bilingual and one happens to just speak English, I'm biased towards that, even if it doesn't need Spanish speaking. So how do we fight that? What do we do with that?
Well, there are 2 elements to it, I think. One is you have to have a plan that you're working towards. We had a client several years ago, and our objective as the outsource company was to present a slate of candidates with a certain percentage of demographics. And they came to us after they did some analysis of their people and said, well, we're not hitting our diversity goals. And so we together looked at the process, and we realized we were presenting them in excess of their request in terms of a mixture of candidates. Somebody else was making a decision on who to hire, and so we were able to pinpoint that it wasn't the input process, it was the selection process. And so you have to pay attention to the numbers. You have to have a plan. So you have to know what you're shooting for. Yeah. There's another side of this is, okay, say you're at a certain demographic today and you want to be at a different demographic. Are you going to fire people so that you can hire people to replace them that meet your demographic? Are you growing enough that you can hire and grow to the number that you want to achieve? There's those kinds of things you have to think about. But then the other side of it is you have to provide training to the people who are making the final decision to help them recognize just what you said. Help them recognize that they have an inherent bias, and how do you get over it? You can do it through different kinds of interview techniques. You can do, but clearly you got to be measuring not only what you're trying to accomplish, but how you're accomplishing it, so that everybody has visibility to it. There has to be a lot of commitment to this. It can't just be, handing down, here's your goal, go for it, see ya, because it's going to take time and effort to get past those unconscious bias to where people are really looking at the candidates who can do the job and they're not concerned with how those candidates look. That's the journey's never over, because the sort of the societal mix is going to change
Sure.
over time. It's paying attention to it and putting the right emphasis where it needs to be, so that people are paying attention to their bias. Sometimes it's as simple as you just look around and realize everybody looks like you. Well, and quite frankly, that could be geography. We had a client, they had a call center in one of the northeastern states, and they were concerned about the demographic mix of their call center. And we said to them, well, you got to relocate to somewhere where you're going to find the people that you say you want to hire, because you're in a neighborhood where they're all the same. And that's, they're those kinds of things, very real issues, right? If you want to have a diverse
Right.
workforce and you locate somewhere where there is no diversity, well, how are you going to get a diverse workforce in that kind of an environment? Are you a hospitality company, and so you have a lot of certain demographics, particularly at the entry level, and so your overall numbers look really great, but then you start looking at the layers,
Oh, yeah.
and so you got to pay attention. This is why these DE&I jobs, the people whose entire focus is DE&I, they're getting to be pretty significant in the organization, to help the senior leadership really understand where they are, how they can get there, because of what we talked about a few minutes ago, the very real results that come from having a good, diverse organization.
Very interesting. Yeah. So there's the great results that come from it, and very interesting. You have the numbers there, and I'm sure that there's some places that you can point people to at the end as well on that. And then you have that process. And I love the plan aspect. You got to know what you plan. You're not going to get something that you're not going to fall into success most of the time.
Right.
And then you're going to have just that training to be aware. Very, very interesting. Now, talk to me as a person who is looking for a job, whether I'm Hispanic, female, whether I this or that. What should I be doing? Because what if I'm worried that I don't fall into the bias of the hirer? What can I do to increase my chances of success?
One of the keys is the sort of the onus is on the company to write a job description that's encompassing, that's inviting.
Mm-hmm.
On the part of the job seeker, pay attention to the job description, and I mean, I just put it bluntly, try not to get turned off. If it's all he pronouns and you're a woman who's applying for the job, do you want the job? Now, this might be a little trigger for you that says this might tell you a little bit about what this company is. So pay attention to the job description, and in some ways it's be broad in your consideration of where you're looking to work, but do your research. It doesn't take much to go in and find out some of the public stances of companies, and is that a company you want to work for? Are they supportive of these kinds of goals? Are they supportive of the community that you represent? It isn't that hard to find out a company's brand these days by doing a little bit of digging. That's gonna help you in terms of making the right decision. In terms of making yourself visible, the challenge there is, sophisticated companies know how to target demographics by where they place their jobs or where they're looking for people. And you want to make sure that you're well positioned in those kinds of things, but some companies are still just just sort of blanket. They're not paying particular attention to certain communities. And so if you want to be considered across the board, you just got to have yourself out there in all the places where people are looking for employees.
Very interesting. Yeah, I like that. Don't pigeon yourself, but don't pigeonhole yourself in the application process, and put yourself out there and do that research above and beyond, knowing that value aspect, knowing the market value. Let's switch over to something a little bit. Why is focusing on employee experience feedback going to be really the way forward in business?
there's a whole field of thought around employee experience. It's another area that really is coming to the forefront in HR. If employees are having a good experience, they're more productive. I mean, it's really as simple as that. Part of that is the environment, some of the stuff we've been talking about, and part of it also can be the technology. You can be the most encompassing, embracing, inclusive environment, but you put your people in front of a screen with 14 different systems and none of them talk to each other and they're having to move data back and forth, they're going to get turned off. It's going to be a bad employee experience. And so there are a number of different ways to deal with that. Are you open to people working from home once in a while? That's part of employee experience. And so I'm not suggesting that there's a particular way to be to achieve good employee experience. The way you should move forward is you should be talking to your employees. What is it they're looking for? I was talking to a CEO of a small company who during COVID had taken advantage of the real estate situation and had bought a new facility and had built it all out and was so excited to welcome everybody back to the office. And they said, "No, thank you, ma'am." They wouldn't come back to the office. She didn't talk to them. She didn't understand that some of these people had moved out of state. They were still doing their job, but they found a cheaper place to live. They had to make arrangements around childcare. Yet the key to employee experience is you really have to be talking to your employees to understand what it is that they want. Maybe they don't want time off. Maybe they want more money. Every environment is going to be different because of the kind of culture you've created, the kind of people that you have working for you. It's talking to your employees first, so it gets back to the plan. And then make a plan that achieves those ends, because that's what's going to improve the employee experience.
Yeah, I love that you're saying talk to the employees, because there are some generalizations that are going out there. Hey, people want this, people want that, but your people might not want that. I mean, think about this as you're listening to this, as you're tuning in and watching. What is it you want that is actually maybe something that the organization you work for does not provide? And what is something they provide that you don't care for? For example, I know somebody who works for a company that is very children-centric, but they don't have kids and they don't have plans for kids. And so they do all this stuff for kids, and they're like, that doesn't really bother. I mean, I don't really care. And then I know another person, he runs a company, and he said, look, we're not going to do any of the social conscious. We're just going to pay you, and we're going to pay you well, and you go do the social consciousness. So if you want to come work for a company that's saving the turtles or whatever it might be, that's not us. But we'll pay you well, and you go do that. Very interesting to understand what the company wants and what the employee wants, and really that conversation, which is really just a communication issue.
It's communication. You have to. It's asking the question, right? I think if nothing else, what COVID in particular has taught us is you just can't assume that. There's no benefit in assuming, because what's the chances that you're going to assume correctly if you haven't done some research, if you haven't had that conversation with your folks to understand what it is they're looking for? It's just, and it's so simple. Yeah. You have some town halls, you do some surveys, you're going to find out pretty quick what people want, and then you can decide, can you meet it? Do you want to meet it? I mean, you don't know that. You might be throwing money at some solution that nobody cares about. Your example is very interesting. We're going to pay you, and then you can use your own time to go do your causes, and we're going to pay you more. We're going to pay you better than you would get if you went somewhere else where you had this built into your organization, and that might work for some people. Yeah, absolutely. But you got to ask the question.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. I mean, that kind of thing would work for me, because my wife and I are invested, and we like to be thinking about where we want to be involved in the community. So it puts the onus back on us. So for me, I didn't work for them, but for me, I like that. I once had an organization that did an extra day event for their staff. And it's like, they meant it as something good, but I was like, that's like time away from my family.
Yeah. And your cause may be different than someone else's cause.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with having that sort of mission-based component to your culture. It's one, you better be upfront about it so that people understand that when they're interviewing with you. But two, it should also be reflective of what your current employees want if you want to maintain a good employee experience.
Okay, so we have people who are listening and watching right now who are thinking, okay, that makes sense. I think, yeah, employee experience. Okay, I'm on board. I'm with this. Let's talk to the two different groups here. We have managers and we have leaders, we have CEOs, we have business leaders who are listening. So what are some simple systems that they can put in place to get this? And then on the other side of the employee, how can they provide this even if there isn't a system to give it?
Interesting. In terms of the first group, the key is understanding what it is the employees want. You can't put anything into place until you understand what they want in the first place, right?
What's their system to get that? Like old school comment boxes probably don't work so well.
Yeah, well, there are a number of fairly sophisticated survey tools that make it easy. There are companies that specialize in gathering this kind of information. I mean, you can go out and hire a consultant. There are consultants in the employee experience space who will come in and they'll look at your systems and they'll look at what you're doing and give you a readout, all of which includes a component of talking to the employees. But simple survey is the place to start. Depends on how big you are, right? If you got 50 people, do a survey in Google, right? And if you got more than that, then maybe you need to go to SurveyMonkey or maybe you need to go to something that's a little more sophisticated. All those kind of tools exist, and then they can give you a readout on where you are. So that's what you've got to do. Then you've got to make sure that you've got the wherewithal to actually put those suggestions into place. You're going to have to evaluate them. You're going to have to decide which ones do you want to do and which ones you don't, and then how do you pay for it. All those kinds of things are going to come from the senior leadership. Then the second group, how do you get people to take advantage of some of these things? Was that your question? That's kind of what I heard, Mike.
Yeah, for the employee. So if you're an employee and no one's asking you.
Yeah. Well, so that's an interesting challenge. If no one's asking you, well, then how much does it matter to you? You can always vote with your feet and go find something else, or you can raise it up and see what the organization is willing to do. Are they willing to take this on? And at least, again, begin asking the question. That's how strongly are you invested in whatever this particular change is? And you hear anecdotes of people who, the one I shared about, no one would come back into the office. There've been some large companies. I'm not going to pick on Tesla, but I'm going to say Tesla put out an announcement not too long ago that everybody's going to come back into the office. It wasn't exactly what he said. It was more, all of our factory people have to be in the factory because that's where work gets done, is in the factory. And so if you work and support somebody in the factory, I expect you to be in the office as much as they're in the factory because that's how I want to see support. Well, it may be a tenable position. It might work for their culture, but the employees then have the choice. Virginia, again, this is not a political thing. 300 people in the Virginia state government quit over the last few weeks. The predominant number of those who gave a reason for resigning said, because you're making us come back into the office. Well, but maybe to do the work, you need to come into the office. And so that's not the right job for you. There are all those kinds of things are at odds. And are you having the communication in the first place? Are you having the conversations so that people understand why you're doing what you're doing, how it impacts them, and then what their choices are? And it may be that people choose to leave because you're going in a direction that isn't the way that they want to go. Well, that's okay too.
A lot of this is like dating in high school. It's kind of talking and figuring that out. And I really say like dating in the younger stages because it's not lifelong. There's like not as often, you don't have kids at that point in time most of the time, right? And so there's not as much overall responsibility, and you can pick up and leave a lot of times in these different jobs, especially if you position yourself well. So that's my encouragement to people, even as you listen to this, is position yourself well so that if something doesn't line up, you're able to move on to something else. I was just talking to somebody recently, Michael, that I'm thinking about this. I'm keeping everything vague. As I was talking to this person, their experience is not fantastic. and they're not loving it. And there's not an opportunity to really share that with their employer. And I said, well, because you're relatively new in this role, stick around for a while, develop your value, develop your soft skills, develop your communication, do your best so that you can get a recommendation. And then when you cross that threshold of, I was talking to one person, it's about a year, you don't want to be flitting around a whole bunch of less than 1 year jobs, a year and a half, then your value is higher. And then you can go choose someplace that the employee experience matches what you want.
I like the sort of the coaching that you're giving. I think that sometimes organizations grow on people, sometimes in a negative way, right? You know, you're there long enough and you realize that, you know, this was a mistake and I should have left. And, you know, it may be that, you know, you're in there, you were looking for a certain thing and it isn't, they don't have exactly what you have, but you know, you could, the dating analogy is not a bad one. There's a certain maturation of the relationship that has to go on because remember in those first conversations, everybody's on their best behavior.
Yeah.
They're telling only the stories that you want to hear. And that's certainly true of the recruiting process of talent acquisition. You know, by and large, the person talking to the candidate's going to be telling them all the good things that the company's doing and all of this and that. And the person answering questions, everybody's really on best behavior in those first stages. And if it's a long-term relationship, you'll find out. And, you know, again, you don't want to flit around. You know, that's also some good advice. But, you know, give it a chance. Maybe it'll work out. Maybe it'll be okay that, you know, you're getting, you know, what you need as to a certain extent and you can pick up the balance somewhere else, or maybe it's just untenable, that this is just not the outfit for you to be in. Okay, make that decision and move on. Right.
And make that decision fairly soon. If you know you're not going to date that person, don't go on the second one.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's where research comes in, right? Once you've made the commitment of joining a company, a lot of your options go away. You can't, you've perhaps lost the ability to ask questions that you could ask during the recruitment process.
Yeah.
But two, there is that whole thing that, you know, you're somewhere for 3 weeks and you realize this isn't the company for you. Maybe you should have done some research before to tell you that, because leaving after 3 weeks is, you know, it's not a good thing. It's going to make getting your next gig that much harder. You know, and are you really thinking about where your career is going if you're making decisions, you know, sort of on that short-term basis?
Right.
There's a little bit of that taking into account it's your career. Mm-hmm. And let's not kid ourselves. The most altruistic company in the world doesn't exist to make you successful in your career. If that happens, then that's a win-win. Companies exist to enrich their shareholders and service their customers and make money. We'll leave the not-for-profits out of this conversation for a minute because that gets a little more complicated. Although not-for-profits have a mission and their objective is to achieve their mission. You got to take accountability for what is it going to take for me to be successful? What is it going to take for me to be happy? And if this isn't where it is, then I need to go find it somewhere else. You know, companies are, you know, they're not architected to help you.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared to help yourself. And it doesn't mean that help isn't available. I don't want to paint too negative a picture, but it really is, it's beholden on me as the individual to take charge of what happens in my life.
I love that everybody needs to hone in on what Michael just said, taking charge. I've even realized that at different times that victim mentality comes up to me. It comes into my mind. And, you know, I'm just a victim of the circumstance or whatever might come up, but really doesn't get you anywhere. And that take charge, don't wait for somebody else to find you the perfect job, go put in the time. I know one guy, he really wanted a specific job at a certain income level and he treated it like a job. And so for 8-9 hours a day, he worked on getting a job. And sure enough, he was able to land a great one. Now let's pivot right here because I think it's really interesting. At the very beginning, I said, who are you to speak into the situation? And you mentioned a startup. And I know that you're doing consulting for people as well, and you're working with people. So this is your area, but what is it that you're trying to accomplish and why is this needed in today's marketplace?
We have a tool today that looks at the resume and evaluates it based on objective criteria, and it does it quickly. So the intent of the tool is to improve productivity, particularly at the front end of the recruiting process. There are still situations where people get hundreds and hundreds of jobs. I talked to one talent acquisition leader. They were recruiting a recruiter. That's what they want. They needed a recruiter. They posted the job. In 36 hours, they get 700 applicants, and then they cut off the job posting. And I said, well, what did you do then? She said, 3 of us, 4 weeks evaluating all 700 resumes. I said, okay, well, what's wrong with that picture? And she said, we probably wanted number 701. And that's the way most of the tools work today. You get some people in, you evaluate them, you go forward, you don't have time to evaluate all of them. Or if you are evaluating them, particularly if you're doing it in some sort of a manual perspective, you might look at the first 10 candidates the same, recognizing that resumes are all different and how people talk about their career is all different. So the first 10, but then the second 10, are they the same as the first 10? And by the time you get to 50, are you even paying attention to the same things as you're paying at the beginning? Well, we eliminate all that. We give you an objective process to evaluate all the resumes. Oh, you get another 100? Let's just add them into the mix and now evaluate all of them again. Oh, you go to the hiring manager. The hiring manager says, there's something else I'd really like to do. Reevaluate them all again. So our focus is enabling the recruiter to spend more time with those conversations with the candidates, with those conversations with the hiring manager, so that they know they're looking for the right thing, and they know they're talking to the right people, and they're not spending all their time just shuffling through paper.
That's good. Yeah, because that seems like, I've never posted a job that had that many applicants. But I posted jobs for people, and I've had a couple hundred applicants.
Yeah, sure.
And my criteria, I was actually working with one of my clients, and he was scaling his business. And so I jumped on as a provisional consultant, helping him hire. And so we posted, and we got, I probably went through 100, but I had a selection criteria that easily made it get through about 50 and just throw 50 away. And then I went down and narrowed. So it wasn't super difficult in that type of situation. I didn't have to have 50 interviews, but it would be interesting to have something do that for me, especially if I was doing a lot more. On the flip side, how do I get noticed out of 700 resumes? I don't know if that's in your.
No, it's relevant. Yeah, no, it's totally relevant. The way you get noticed is you actually have things on your resume which reflect what the job description asks for. Now, I'm not suggesting that you add things that you don't have. So if there are 5 criteria and you meet 4 of them, does it mean you're not going to be considered? No, it doesn't mean that. And if your resume doesn't speak to the job description, then why are you even applying? I'll give you an example. I posted a customer success director job. I wanted somebody with experience with SaaS software and in the recruiting space, and they understood applicant tracking systems. The most qualified person I got had been selling lawn care services for 9 years. So I had no qualified applicants. That was the bottom line. But here's this person who has had nothing to do with software. Maybe they were using Excel in their job. Has had nothing to do with customer success, and yet they felt like they were qualified to post. So, don't kid yourself. There will be people who have the qualifications. You can see this on LinkedIn. I know not everybody's on LinkedIn. Not all jobs are on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn will tell you your top 25 in terms of what's on your LinkedIn profile and what the job is asking for, or your top 50, or you're a top candidate. If your experience doesn't reflect what the job is looking for, you're going to get overlooked, whether it's by a computer that's doing an evaluation or it's by a person that's doing the same thing, doing an evaluation. That's probably the single most critical thing. Beyond that, it's, can you make a connection with somebody at the organization that might get you noticed? If you don't know anybody, you probably can figure out who the recruiter is. Certainly you can with LinkedIn. You can figure out who posted the job. and just make a connection, that's going to raise your profile because of at least there'll be some name recognition. This is a process. Getting a good job, you got to do some work. You got to put in some time. You talked about a guy who was spending 8-9 hours looking for, to find the right job, 8-9 hours a day. Okay, if you've got certain things that you're looking for, you're going to have to not only go out and find where that exists, but make sure that you really do match what it is that they're looking for.
If you don't care for a job, then you can do that whole just apply.
Right.
Just send this one right over here. I've done that before. It's been a long time, but a couple of years ago, I saw a job that was interesting. I had a resume uploaded, Michael,
Yep.
and I didn't really need the job. I didn't really care, but it was just like, well, if it happens, it happens. Click, apply, and sure enough, no interest. The automated software picked up that it was not a good fit and moved me out, which is a good thing. But I think that's a great reason to do what you're doing. There are a lot of people who are just click apply.
Yeah, there are.
And your software is going to take out of those 700, it's going to limit it down to more relevant ones. And I think that's fantastic. The other thing that as you were talking, one of the things that I've done, I'm not in a spot where I'm looking for jobs, so I don't have this right now, but is that master resume where it has every single thing. It's, a normal resume should be 3 pages max, 2 pages really, and but have a master resume that's 6 pages long, that has all the different skills, and then you apply, and then you take out certain aspects and you plug and play. That's just my kind of feedback I've given to a couple of people. Is that something you resonate with as well?
Absolutely right. It's probably the simplest, where the alternative is you create a resume for every job that comes up, which is difficult, right?
Right.
It's, if you have everything in one place, it's a lot easier to take out the things that aren't necessary than it is to try and add in the things that you forgot to put in the first time. Did you forget, or are you just adding in things? We had just a short story. We had one resume, and what our system does is it picks up it's looking for things in the resume, and this person scored very well in this one area, and so I have a feature that I can click on it, and it'll show me where it appears in the resume, and I couldn't find these words anywhere on the resume that we were looking for, the skill set. There was this little tiny green box down at the bottom, which is usually it highlights it in green when it shows that. I took the resume out. I highlighted all the text, and I changed the color of the text to black. What this person had done is they had pasted their resume on top of the job description. That way they had all the words covered. Well, systems are going to figure that out. I'm sorry.
It's hilarious.
Trying to, weave your way through, and okay, good. I hope I haven't given anybody any ideas, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
That is hilarious. That's like that whole classic thing. I don't know if people try to do more on websites, but same thing. Be a black background, and they'll put black font there so that SEO picks is.
Yeah, exactly. And the spiders are too smart for that.
Yeah, it worked out.
They're looking for relevance. They're looking for proximity, all those kinds of things. It's it's an interesting game that people think they need to play.
That is fascinating. Don't do that though. So don't do that, everybody.
Maybe you shouldn't be applying for the job. If you got to play that kind of a game, maybe you should be looking at doing something a little different. That's simple advice.
Well, that's a cool feature though that you've added in your program. That click here, show me where that is, because they see it within the context.
Exactly right.
Executive communication coach. Oh, that was with this and this and this.
Exactly.
Team leader. Oh, that was a long time ago, or whatever. Is. So, hey, Michael, this has been so fun. Where can people find you? Where can people find some of the resources and such that you're talking about here?
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find. Email is michael@resumesieve.com. And our website is resumesieve.com. Pretty easy to find on the web. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Mike Yinger, easy to find as well. And happy to connect with people and answer questions and see where the conversation goes.
Perfect. And we'll put that, of course, in the show notes and the YouTube notes as well. And is it SIV, or how do you spell, or how are you spelling?
Sieve is SIEVE.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, Resume Sieve.
Which makes more sense. I was going with like Civilization, Sid Meier from the 1990s. So I was like, is
Yeah.
that CIV? Dates my video game playing days when I think of.
Well, there's something anyway.
Hey, Michael, this has been great, though. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
And to all our listeners and to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in with Advance with Mike Acker and Michael Yinger. Thank you so much for taking the time to do so. Take a moment, like, subscribe, share, comment, pass us on. And until next time, advance.
Thanks for listening to Advance with Mike Acker, a podcast designed to provide an edge for leaders through improving practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Mike is a best-selling author and business owner who has helped many leaders increase their skills and their confidence, propelling them to new heights in their personal and professional endeavors. Join an incredible group of professionals taking the steps to become better leaders at connect.stepstoadvance.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.